G'day folks, Mark here again. I decided it's time for me to share a little bit more about my thoughts on the state of our world and some of the reasons that I think are part of it. And I suppose the first conversation I've had about this was a thing I called worth versus wealth, which is, I think, a little bit about the status quo of the human brain, the human psyche, and the world we live in now. And that video is worthwhile checking out if you're interested in what that means. But the worth versus wealth thing is something I will probably come back to in places. The next bit, I suppose, of the conversation, when I think about the status of our world, or where we're at in civilization, and really coming from whichever part of the spectrum you sit in, I would think it would largely be universally agreed that our civilization is in a little bit of trouble. We've got some stuff going on in a fairly big way, which has been a cycle over history for people to pay attention to it, that it does get out of shape and then it gets reset or things change. And I suppose if you're one of the people who don't see that we have a problem, it's all good, then you're probably more a part of the problem than the rest of us. Not to say we're not all part of the problem. But listen, this scenario, I suppose I'd go with a couple of different ways of looking at things, in the way of trying to put my picture forward as to what I'm seeing. And part of it comes from, well, I suppose it comes to where we learn to be what we are, be it the genetics of who we are or where our psyche comes from, and a lot of it to do with as we are as children, as how we're raised and how we come into this life. And then when I think about trying to explain this, it probably comes to the level where I should be explaining myself a little bit more. People that know and watch the channel know that I'm a mechanic. My channel is about long-range shooting, which is, I've got videos on what we do there. That's very much a passion and an interest and a YouTube channel. Mechanic is what I've been for most of my life in the way of in what I work and how I earn a living, running my own business as a performance mechanic, but been a mechanic for a long time. But that's just for the last 40 years of my life. I'm 60 years old, for those that don't know. So the first 20 years of my life, or thereabouts in rough numbers, basically there's things that I've found and figured out with overthinking things, being, as a word I've coined before, which is philosophical, which is a spoonerized philosophical, but is the part of the process of a big part of becoming who you are is the things you deal with. And I suppose we live in a world which would also consider victimhood as something, and virtue, and there's some strange ways in which our world is working, both be it the media, be it the advertising, be it the individuals, be it government, whatever it is, from woke to a very confused place in our world. And I think there's a large degree of, and I suppose I'll start to get into what I'm explaining. For me, things like being bullied, as much as I understand bullying as bad in its most extreme form, I don't know too many people that haven't, of successful people, be those entrepreneurs or be that some of the top of the pile on what we know in the way of our world, but not too many of them don't have a story of something that inspired them to be more. And that generally isn't positive encouragement that inspired me more. It'll generally be a hurdle, an obstacle they had to get over. And that would be, in a lot of cases, bullying. And not that they bullied, that they were bullied by, whether it was the story, whether their father or their mother or individuals and that side of things, but not so much in the negative sense that it's seen now. For me, yes, I can say I was bullied. I don't see it as a negative. I see it as part of my life. And I suppose my story goes into probably a pretty normal story for back then. That's in the 60s and the 70s. And I was the oldest child of a school teacher family, but my mum was at home with the rest of my siblings. My dad was a school teacher, and he wasn't bullying or doing anything wrong on that sort of score, but he was a school teacher in a small country town. And then some of the older kids and groups of kids and things that would bang into me, and they would just give me a little flogging, give me a little bashing because my dad had been their school teacher. So that's something that I took as it was a little bit of a rougher town. It was in the middle of the wheat belt in with Aboriginals and with white fellas, wadulars as they'd call us. In a long time ago. So, but really, it was just a normal country town in that place, and I was the son of a school teacher that they decided they didn't like school teachers, so they'd give me a little beating. Nothing that ever harmed me too physically, and it's not something I wear as a mental scar whatsoever. It's part of the tapestry of who I am, and I got a different perspective about things because of that side of things I see as a positive. Money was never a driving cause for me, and certainly something that I took longer to figure out. It's never something that really inspired me to do things for money, which ended up being a negative for me in my beginning of my life. For the first 10 or so years of working, I was very much underpaid for what I did. A bit about my naivety, a bit about my parents didn't have any clue of what was going out there. They were school teachers, so they didn't understand the normal world of wages and things, and certainly some people took some advantage of me in that time. Once again, apart from financially, I've always been a little challenged. Not something I see as a negative whatsoever. It's not a relevant detail. It does run into a place when I think about things, and something that will affect later on when I talk about education. I certainly worked in a world where I was working in mining companies where I was working as a leading hand. I was one of the fitters, the go-to fitters that the other fitters, with fitters in mining is sort of engineer / mechanic, is a way to sort of describe it, where the people with the spanners. And I worked in the few years I did that sort of job, I ended up in a place where I was working as one of the leads in my panel, in my group. And lots of the other fitters or operators that needed help, then they'd get me in there because I would know how to fix it. Had been doing it for long enough. And was, I suppose, better at my job than the majority of them. But I was newer to the mine site and newer to mining, so I was paid a lot less. And there was cases in particular instance where qualified people which were younger than me, but a lot more qualified than me, were paid up to $10,000 more a year. Doesn't sound much now, I suppose, when I was being paid $42,000 and they were being paid $52,000 back in the 90s. That was a fair bit of money. And when I was the person that would always go and fix their work, I was the person they'd call to help them through the job they had to do, and I would do the lion's share of the work in that panel. Then there was definitely a thing I learned at that stage, that our qualification-driven world, and be it a university degree, and there's lots of conversations we're going to have there, or a college degree, is paid so much more, not because of knowledge, because of passing a test. That definitely put a slant on me to, I suppose, view things in a different perspective, and maybe that our system didn't have that all sorted out so well. But listen, there's lots more conversations I can get into down that path, and maybe I'll share that, and I'm probably ruffling feathers as I talk. But actual fact, the thing that I really feel that is a big part of our society at the moment is sort of in that place and sort of around that place. But that is, I think it would be universally accepted that one of the most important jobs, or if not the most important job we've got as a civilization, or even as individuals, would be raising our children, raising our young. It would be probably the most important job. Some people make it the second most important job, but I think it's probably the most important job. By disclaimer here, I'm not allowed to talk about children because we don't have kids. We've got our own story to go with that. But another one of the things I'm not so keen on in our society, knowledge doesn't just exist out of those that have made the mistakes. But let me carry on. We don't have kids, but I think we'd still all universally agree that that would be one of the most important jobs. And then in another bracket, if you want an important job done, You would probably want someone with, you want whether it's someone, an operation in the way of a doctor, or it's getting your car repaired, or getting your washing machine sorted out, or maybe building a bridge, or building the space shuttle, or whatever it is, whatever job you want, you probably want people who've done it more than once. You wouldn't want first timers doing the job. You would be, as a smart way to go forward, if you're going to get that job done, you'd really want people with as much experience and the best resume and references and things to be able to take on to give that job. And then you stop and think about how our society does what we consider the most important job. We give it to first timers. Now, I'm not at all saying that parents don't do the best they can. I could put my hand on my heart and say that the vast majority of parents do the absolute best job they can. But I'm going to have to tell you, when you stop and think about it in a simply pragmatic sense, just put the logic into it, we basically give the most important job we've got to people who have absolutely no experience. Yeah. So it comes from the same as my last conversation, our small community groups. There's a strong possibility that the parents only were part of the educators, the caregivers, that the community did that sort of stuff, and then they learned from the whole community rather than from just their parents. As you go forward in our society, and probably not too many years ago, extended families were how children were raised. So the mum is still always going to be the mum, but probably it was her mum or her mum's mum that did a lot of teaching the child, or his mum's mum. The same with the extended family in all those fashions, where there is a lot more wisdom, there's a lot more experience, there's people who've done it 3, 4 or 5, or as a community or as an extended family. There's a wealth of knowledge that goes into actually helping this process. And whether that's stopping a baby crying at night, or dealing with a baby crying at night, or that's learning about the big thing that our society is missing, about consequences, whether that comes into discipline or whatever structure that is, all the things that matter to try and end up with the best result, rather than it being given to basically asking for information from universities or from government departments or people that have trained at something, which is not the way to find out that information to a certain degree. And we can come back to that's just the same thing I was just saying, where that was just a payment thing. But where I was the person who did the job, someone else was the person who got paid for the job. It's a little different, but you see where I'm heading with this. Real experience is the most valuable thing. The technical knowledge, that sort of stuff, yes, there is definitely places for it. Yes, it's very important, but is it more important than the actual experience? I'm here to say no, it's not. There is no question. The actual experience, if you want someone, and I suppose I'd finish that conversation off in talking about anyone who's worked in trades or in industry and that side of things, we all know that the university grad is the pain in the ass because they don't know. Doesn't mean they don't want to know. Some of them, don't want to know. They already think they know everything. But it doesn't mean the majority, or they don't end up wanting to know and wanting to get to that place. But our system is structured just like it is with raising children, where the priorities are put in places that I see some issues with. So I think there's some stuff to ponder there, at least, as maybe another one of the things that as our civilization moves forward, is something we should factor in some of. Well, let's just go with maybe giving the complete job to people who've never done it before about something that's so important. Maybe that's worth some consideration as to maybe a different way of looking at doing things. And I suppose as I go into these talks, there's something that I have thought, whether this is a reward or this is just something you don't want to listen to, but this is, I have, out of many years of doing all sorts of stuff, have lots of stories. Here's one of my stories, which I'll do as I would hope it's a little reward to the end of this. As a younger man, when I was working as a mechanic out in the bush, so this is down in Noangarup actually, for people who know the state, I used to ride around, for a while there at least, I had V8 utes and bits and pieces, but for a while there I rode around on a motorbike. GPZ 1100, one of the first one of them, the B1, for the people who know that motorbike. Not a great piece of engineering in this day and age, but it was a marvellous piece of engineering back then, well, sort of. A little top heavy, but reasonably powerful for what it was. And I used to do a little bit of a loner. I worked in the town, I did a fair bit there, but I'd also go back to where I had come from not that long ago for occasionally socially for a weekend or that type of thing down in Albany. A little over 100 miles away. And that's how I would travel by myself, gear sack and things on the back of the bike. I also had the logic of I would always travel faster than the speed limit. I was on a motorbike and I was sort of always in a rush to get places. I was reasonably good at what I did. I believe that a lot of the speeding that we have in our world is much more about government controlling things, and I understand the logic where it comes from, but realistically people paying attention, riding a little bit quicker, not the problem. It's the people not paying attention or without the skills that are the problem, or all the other details. But anyway, I would always travel a little bit faster, and it meant that being pulled up for speeding was something that I certainly ran into a fair bit of my life, and that was something I wanted to avoid. So the way I did that was that on those sort of trips I would take the road less travelled. If you stay on the bitumen road, go through the towns, then you're more likely to get pulled up just doing 5Ks over the limit coming into the town than you are if you're just sitting on the gravel road where you would think you wouldn't travel on that sort of bike, a big long gravel road. For people who know that sort of stuff, yes, we used to do that, used to travel very quickly on that type of thing, very stable and easy to do, right down to the level of, I remember images, I'd love to have the camera in my brain, but I remember the images of travelling 2 up, had someone on the back of the bike with me, and as we're driving down this gravel road at a fair rate of knots, I looked over at the shadow, there's light coming across us, the shadow's over there and you could see it. It's quite a cool image, I suppose you'd imagine, as you're driving along there you can see your shadow. Looked over there at the shadow and the rear pillion passenger was right back there like they were dead on the back of the bike, and I thought, what's going on? Why are they head down there? And I glanced over there a few times. I'm paying attention on the road, but glanced over, what's going on? And I give the little bike a little wriggle, and they sat back up. And we're travelling on motorbikes, you can't hear each other, you can't talk or anything when you're travelling at reasonable speed. Helmets on, that sort of thing. What in actual fact was they were that relaxed that they were asleep on the back of the bike at lots of miles an hour on a gravel road. So that's how comfortable and stable it all is in that part of the picture. But this was a winter's night, it was dry roads, and this was largely a big flat gravel dirt road with a couple of big corners in it. Those 2 big corners were a reasonable challenge to navigate. They had big wheel ruts in them, and as long as you sat in your wheel rut, you could go through there without backing the speed down too much, and you couldn't decelerate too much on that sort of bike without causing it to drift and move around, and that'd be an issue. You get into the marbles and potentially in trouble. So it's a cold night, it's a very clear night, and I'm sitting on decent speed. I come into my corner, I'm doing all bits and pieces, and I just start to ease out a little bit, so just bring my speed down a little bit to go through this corner through my rut, through that groove in that corner around there. And I notice at the end of my corner, there's a roo sitting in the middle of the road, just sitting there. Big boomer, as we call him, so a big male sitting in the middle of the road. And I think, that looks like he's in my spot. I wasn't sure, but as I'm coming up and I'm getting around that corner, I'm getting closer, yep, he's in my spot. He's sitting right in the middle of my rut. I'm moving too quick to change ruts, so I'm bringing it down as gently as I can, trying to get it to the point where hoping he's going to react. And right at the last moment, right just as I'm about to slam into the side of him, he just slides forward. If you know how roos move, they just move forward, they sort of drag their tail and just move forward. He just moved forward enough to where I ran over his tail. Might have broken his tail, I don't know. He was gone by the time I was gone, by the time I went through. But I ran over his tail. This bike, I had aircraft landing lights down just above the front wheels. I travelled at night with it, that sort of stuff. So this was at night time, if I haven't told you that bit of the story. the lights were down, and one of them, it hit his hip and pushed it back into the headers on the bike. There are 4-in-1 with headers at the front. Pushed it back in the headers in the bike. I didn't realise at that stage, because all I did was hit him, ran over his tail is all I actually felt. And I think I felt the bike wriggle a little bit, but it got just across that. I'm still doing high speed, and I was that relieved that I was still up and I wasn't skidding down the road on my back with the bike, you know. So that I let out a great big exhale. When that happened, it's cold night, and I let out a big exhale. It instantly fogged up my visor. So it was, I couldn't see anything. So then I'm flipping the visor up as I'm bringing it down to a stop, dead still, probably 100 meters up the road. I'd got through the corner, I was dead straight, sitting in the road, put my feet down, visor up, it's freezing cold, and I'm still alive, okay? I haven't broken anything, I'm still here, it's all still good. I then, after I sort of spent what felt like a couple of minutes, it probably was 15 seconds, but I did a little wibble with the bike. People who ride bikes, you move your butt, you wriggle your bike around so that everything moves and you can feel it all, and before you start to take off again, it's just sitting there idling on the way, blop, 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 blop. And I noticed the bike, it flopped one way, the steering wheel flopped, the bars flopped one way and didn't go the other way, they clunked back. What had actually happened is that it pushed that spotlight back onto the headers. So if I'd got a tiny bit out of shape, I was done, because I wasn't going to be able to correct it at all. It was because it just went straight across, and I sat in my rut, slowed down, stopped. I had to get off the bike and pull that spotlight back forward. It was broken, but get it out of the road, and then I rode my way home. But there I was, sitting at, like I said, high speed, just under 100 miles an hour actually, and we had just clipped a roo. I probably broke his tail, hopefully not. He was a big fella, so maybe a muscle in there to get around it. Put a little dent in his hip, and yeah, just one of those stories that I've got many of them, but that's that one, and maybe that's something. If you like those little stories at the end of things, then I'll keep doing that too. Anyway, guys, that's my little thought on the, listen, like I said, pretty important job that we probably could do a little different and end up with a little better result, which, and for those who, I should finish that off with, offended by the fact that I raise kids, my kids were raised perfectly. I've no doubt you did your absolute best. And in some cases, that's going to have been better than any other option. But I would say the wisdom, and certainly from my experience of things, is that back then, those first years create a lot more of who we are as humans than we might realize. So, like I said, just part of the conversation, just a starting point, and certainly, yeah, listen, our civilization could do with some fixing, and I think these are all the building blocks of where you actually find it, rather than working on the top of it, rather than working over at what you think the problem is. The actual problem is over here, like I said previously, and that definitely does factor into a lot of other things, which either worth versus wealth is in there as well. But anyway, guys, thank you very much for checking in. Let us know all your thoughts. Catch you next time.